Last month, I described for you my most meaningful Thanksgiving. I talked about the fast, the fishing, and my faith. I also mentioned at the time of that Thanksgiving, I was fast approaching what some have called the dark night of the soul. You see, when I gave up my goal of becoming a fishery biologist and dropped out of school, I lost all forward momentum and felt completely rudderless. I was turning 30, very single, far from family and friends. I spent my time fishing when I could, biking and hiking when I couldn't fish. And when I couldn't do either of those, I was drinking more than I was willing to admit the rest of the time. And on those cold and rainy days that I had no money, in other words, when I couldn't fish, couldn't hike, couldn't drink, I would hang out at used bookstores. And thanks to the internet, I actually found pictures of one of my favorite stores called the Tin Can Mailman in Arcata, California. And to this day, the smell of bookstore brings me back there. If you use book, you go to a used bookstore, you know that smell? That's where I go. I spend hours there. And it was on these shelves that I discovered, Mircea Eliade's The Sacred and the Profane, James Fraser's The Golden Bough, Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. Many more as well, but having discarded the religion of my parents, I was discovering in these works, these old works, a new appreciation for religious myth and ritual. I also discovered several works on Celtic myth and legends, which so fully captured my imagination that I would eventually adopt the mythology as my own and become a practicing pagan. Now, even though I look back on those years on the north coast of California, living among redwoods and hippies with great fondness, and having great memories of the place and people, I was far from happy. My rudderlessness, it morphed into depression. Helped in no small part by a night in jail and the accompanying legal problems that come with the DUI. My job selling windows and doors at a small local company came with no real future. My budding spiritual life only served to alienate me from my religiously conservative family. I had no spiritual community. I could not even imagine a church that I would want to belong to, let alone that would accept me. Having long suffered bouts of depression throughout my life, the mother of all depressions was about to hit. And when it did, everything would change. Now, before I continue, this is an important part of my story. If you ever wonder why I think it's so important for Unitarian Universalism to be more visible in the community, why I continue to write monthly columns in the paper, why I'm such an advocate for us to be active and to reach out to those in need, is because when I was going through this worst part of my life, there was a Unitarian Universalist fellowship just down the block. And like too many of our churches, they pretty much kept to themselves, feeling no need to evangelize or even promote their existence, thus significantly reducing any chance encounter I may have had with my future spiritual home. But I digress. So let's return back to the story. So this was a full year and a few weeks beyond the Thanksgiving fishing trip. I was on the verge of losing my job. My depression was so bad that I was avoiding work. I was even having a hard time just calling in sick. My depressions often came with severe back pain. And so I was not just emotionally immobile, I was physically immobile. And then the storm came. A strong winter storm blew through the area, leaving my single-wide trailer in the woods without power for several days. And no power meant no light, no heat, no water. I could always drive, but that took energy. That took volition. My internal reality had become one with my external reality. Where I had always resisted my depression, I'd always tried to fight it and just muscle through. And even though, no matter what I did, the depression would always kick my ass. But now in the darkness, the approaching winter solstice, in the darkness of my depression, in the darkness of the blackout, with my strength completely sapped, I surrendered to the darkness. I was wrapped night and day in a bright orange sleeping bag. Candles were my only source of light and heat. And what turned out to be the final night of the power outage, of course I did not know that. After sleeping much of the day, I found myself wide awake at 2 a.m. Rain and a distant thunder my only company. And in the darkness, I began to see my life in a whole new light. Perhaps it was all the mythology that I had been reading, the books about mythology and the myths that I was actually reading. I began looking at myself as a character in a story. As a character in one of those myths. And I realized that I was a character not living my story. I was living someone else's story. The story that was put upon me by my parents, society, school, other people's expectations that I adopted as my own, but they weren't truly mine. I was living the wrong story. And so I asked myself, what if the life I'm trying to live is not my life? And I wondered if my depression was a symptom of my failure to live my story instead of the one handed down to me. You see, I'd always seen my depression as the problem that I needed to solve. But I wondered if it was just a symptom of the real problem. You see, an infection is a sign that something isn't right in the body. And if you have a splinter, for example, and you don't do anything about that splinter, the infection will just keep coming back no matter how hard you fight it. Now, this doesn't mean that my depression wasn't real. It was as real and potentially dangerous as an untreated infection. I played around with this thought there in the middle of the night. actually excited about something for the first time in days, maybe weeks. The thought that my depression wasn't the problem. I found some pen, paper, started writing out my thoughts. Looking at what I wrote a few days later, most of it seemed meaningless. Chicken scratch. Most of it, anyway. One thing that I could read was a poem that I wrote that night. I don't actually remember writing it, but there was the evidence. And the other was a plan, well, more of a vague notion of a plan, but it gave me hope all the same. I want to share with you the poem as it is today. I don't have the original version. It's over the years have kind of tweaked it a little bit. But this is how it is today. It's called The Winter King. Without the day, there can be no night. Without the dark, there is no light. The sun has died, the mother grieves, the earth is cold, gone are her leaves. Bathed in the darkness of creation, we seek the eternal light within. The winter king will be reborn to bring the summer's yield of corn. Hang the wreath and trim the tree, and we'll celebrate you and me. Okay, William Butler Yeats, it is not. But it's meaningful to me because of the process that I went through in writing it. In my cold, dark little house, instead of fighting the darkness, instead of fighting the depression, I embraced it. I let it embrace me. I let myself be engulfed in the darkness. And in that darkness, I found the light of hope. And the hope came in the form of the plan that I mentioned. Well, it's not really a plan. Like what I actually wrote was, or as I remember it, the old stories are killing us. We need a new one. In the days that followed, the power returned, and my vague idea of a plan developed into an actual plan. To go back to school with the goal of becoming a teacher. The plan, in a way, was an attempt to write a new plot line that would serve to guide my choices. And that's what it did. Except for the major plot twist that would come later after I moved back to Southern California, went back to school, and then I discovered Unitarian Universalism. And so instead of becoming a teacher, I became a minister, another form of teacher of sorts. When you think about it, what is the distinguishing characteristic of every religion? My original premise still held. The old stories are killing us, and we need new ones. Religions are stories. I also realized those who tell the stories rule society. They shape our reality. And events this week go to serve that point exactly. Consider why the CDC is being told to avoid certain words like science-based, transgender, and diversity. Why? Because they are at odds with the very story being told in Washington. This is why politics and religion are not a good mix. Because when politics rules religion, They rule the story which shapes us all. Every religion is a story or collection of stories that together form a meta-narrative, a story that serves to make sense out of this complex and crazy thing we call life. Hanukkah, for example, is a story, and it's part of the much larger story of the Jewish people. It's a story when they were able to kick the Greeks out of their country and for a while be free before the Romans came in. They have a history of being conquered, but yet remaining a people. Why is that? Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, physicist, inventor, writer, and theologian, he wondered this too. He said, "For whereas the people of Greece and Italy, of Sparta, Athens, and Rome, and others who come so much later have perished so long ago, Jewish people still exist, despite efforts of so many powerful kings who have tried 100 times to wipe them out. As historians testify, and as can easily be judged by the natural order of things over such a long spell of years." And, of course, he's writing, 17th century, and didn't get any better for Jewish people after that. Why is that, do you suppose? Is it a miracle? Are Jewish people truly the chosen people of Yahweh? Or might there be a more simple reason? Personally, I think it's their story and they're sticking to it. Jewish holidays and holy days aren't just a celebration of the past. Instead, through story and ritual, a retelling of the story, reliving the story, they relive the past, become part of it, part of the big circle, holding hands with the past, passing it on to the future. Every Sabbath is the seventh day of creation. Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah all mark important mythical and historical events in Jewish history. They relive their story. They have kept it alive in spite of everything. And that has kept the people, the Jewish people, as a people. Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, and noted psychiatrist and neurologist, he reminds us, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." I translate that own way into choosing one's own story. What is your story? Are you the hero of your own story, or are you the victim? Our chosen and unchosen stories, they shape our reality. It shapes how we relate to each other and the world, how we deal with problems. And if we would change our perception of the world, we must change our story. And in my own case, I made the choice to be the hero of my own story, as opposed to the victim. Prior to that dark night of the soul, I never saw myself as having any real agency. I interpreted everything that happened to me as being outside of my control. Oh, my car's didn't start. Oh, the damn car. It's my own fault. I didn't put water in the battery. I blamed everything on everything else. Works both ways. I also didn't take responsibility for things that went right in my life. But on that night, I made the choice to turn that idea on its head. Realizing, like Frankl did, that even though I couldn't control other people, places, or things, I could control my attitude. And I did that by adopting a new story. Now, the particular story that I adopted happened to be the pagan wheel of the year, which is a story of Mother Earth and her son, consort, the sun. The solstice and equinox events correspond to death, life, and rebirth of the child consort, and connects the changing seasons of the planet with the changing seasons of life. I saw myself as part of this larger whole for the first time. And it helped me reinterpret my own life story and see it all in a healthier, more mature fashion. Hanukkah, Christmas, Yule, Kwanzaa, they're all stories. Some might say they are just stories in an effort to minimize or even negate them. That is to miss the point of a story. Stories are not about facts, they are about the larger truths of life. And what is the most important truth of them all? What do all of the most important, most cherished stories all teach us? Well, in Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl answered that question this way. He said, "For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into a song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom of so many thinkers, the truth that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire." He goes on to say that then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of humanity is through love and in love. So whether we celebrate Hanukkah, the Hanukkah story, the Christmas story, the Yule story, the Star Wars story, the message is always the same. We are each and all a part of something much bigger than ourselves. Call that God, call that goddess, call that the force. We are part of this universe. We're part of the universe story. We are the universe made conscious. We are the universe fashioned by love, through love, in the image of the universe. And though that universe is immense and so full of stories, we cannot even begin to imagine them all. In spite of or because of that, each and every single story matters. Your story matters. Your story matters. And the story you choose defines you. So choose a good one. And then let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. So be it. Amen. And blessed be. Now let's join in singing.